Hello, everyone. I'm Trent Loos. Welcome to a Red Shirt Friday edition of Rural Routes, the program where we gather every day at this time, well, Monday through Friday anyway. And what we do when we gather is continue to address the issues between rural and urban America. And the reason that I say Red Shirt Friday is because for 17 years, every Friday, I have worn a red shirt to say thank you to those individuals that provide our opportunity through freedom through the United States military. No better guest to talk about in terms of preserving freedom, get my tongue twisters all out of me, Ammon Bundy, than Mr. Ammon Bundy himself. And how good to be able to call you once again. Thank you for your efforts, your leadership, and your perseverance to get it done. Ammon, how are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing a lot better. Things are looking up these days.
Boy, there sure has been a tremendous momentum shift across the country since the announcement this week. What were your thoughts leading up to Monday and what Judge Navarro said in terms of dropping the charges against part of, and I don't want people to forget, you have two brothers and there are still people in what we're calling Tier 2, but for you, Ryan, and your father, to have her drop the charges, what were your thoughts leading up to that?
Well, we, it was a long time coming, but we knew that we were going to do our best to get the truth in front of the jury. And when we went to trial, we were able to do that. We were able to get a lot of truth, and every time something would come up, the judge would stop the trial and go into a sealed hearing situation because she began to see a bunch of stuff that the government had done to our family and also that the government had done to hide the evidence. And it just kept going on. We had about a 6-week trial. It was scheduled for four months. And in 6 weeks, we were only able to get through 3.5 witnesses because we had so many sealed hearings in between on all the misconduct of the government. And so it was a pretty good battle. But us being in prison as long as we were, we knew what the discovery was showing. We lived it, and we were just grateful that we were finally able to get it in front of the judge and have her rule in this dismissal.
I actually had a tremendous conversation with another patriot this week, Susie Hammond. And Susie and I actually got into a conversation that I think you could shed some tremendous light on, and that is that in the fast-paced world that we all live in today, we have to be here, we have to be there. I don't know that we stop and think about what we're grateful for, what we should be doing. And we talked about how her husband and her son have had plenty of time to reflect upon that. You had 2 years. What do you think about it? And what are the thoughts that cross your mind when you're incarcerated for 2 years, unjustly, I might add, but what's your mental capacity on a daily basis?
Well, I would have to agree with Susie, and she's a wise woman, and just gratitude in itself is going to pull you through. Gratitude for life, gratitude for the time that you did have with your family. There was most of the time we were incarcerated there, threatening us with over 100 years of minimum sentences, and so the possibility of us ever seeing or never seeing our family again was a real possibility. And there was days of just being grateful for the time that you did have with your little babies and your wife was all that you got that helped you through. And but anyway, grateful for the support that we have on the outside, for the voices that people were putting out there and would not be silenced. One of the things that they do is they isolate you by putting you in prison, and then while you're in there, they demonize you, and then so that they can destroy you. And our supporters wouldn't let that happen, and I'm extremely grateful for that.
For those of us that were trying to find a way to help and to share the real story as often as we possibly could, we knew from day one that the only way they could prosecute you was through providing so much torture and unusual punishment to you as an individual that you would cave and say, okay, I agree, I plead guilty, just get me out of this situation. And I don't believe the judicial system in the United States had ever met anybody with the faith and conviction of the Bundy family. And that, to me, was the telltale sign day in and day out that I watched for 2 years. You just remained steady to the course and knew what it is, what the truth was, and what you were going to do to make sure we held everybody accountable to the U.S. Constitution.
Well, you know, I think a lot of people get maybe, I don't know, just because of the situation, thinking that we were something other than just a simple ranching family. Because I just want to be clear that that's all we are, that's all we were. And we had a brute force come down against our family, and we did the only thing we knew how, and that is just to pray to the Lord and try to follow the best we can His guidance that He gives us. And we did that. And so when we ended up getting thrown in prison because of that, we knew without doubt that the Lord was going to deliver us, because we did what the Lord asked us to do. And we didn't do it, facetiously. We didn't do it with malice. We did it because it was our right and duty to do it. And so we did have that advantage, knowing that what we did was right.
And every step of the way, along with that, thanks to social media, we got to watch the wives of the men who were incarcerated, and they did the same exact thing. They held the faith. They did it with dignity and respect. They asked for prayers and assistance for those of us that wanted the truth to prevail, and I thought that was quite impressive as well.
Yeah, our wives and children are just so stalwart and supportive. I remember on the phone with my wife, just at the beginning, it was difficult, and she told me, Ammon, you've got to find something that brings, happiness. You've got to live in there. And that was great advice. I had my 9-year-old son. I heard a story while I was in there. It was about 3 or 4 months, maybe 5 months after being incarcerated, and he was coming home with his football coach after football practice, and his football coach was just commenting, on the situation and how difficult it was. And he said to my son, Bowen, Bowen, I just want you to know that I believe that what your dad did was right. And my son Bowen looks at him and goes, Coach, of course he did what was right. It wasn't even a question in his mind. And even for the coach to say that it was even just out of sorts with my son. Mm-hmm. And to have that type of support and that knowledge from those that you love the most is a tremendous advantage, and just another thing to be grateful for.
It was a whirlwind. I know that for a fact while you were at Malheur, and you may or may not even remember our conversation, but the one part of our conversation that I have told people about time and time again, and that is we were walking from one building to the next, where we ultimately did a video that I hope everybody watches, and we're not going to relive the stuff that we talked about there. It relates to the U.S. Constitution and why ranchers have the rights to graze their own property on federal land and multiple use. I don't want to relive that, but I said to you as we're walking from one building to the next, I said, I suppose it'd be nice just to be home fixing fence. And you said, do you remember what you said to me?
I actually don't. I apologize.
Well, I probably would have fallen out of my chair had you told me what you said, because you talked to so many people, but you said to me, well, Trent, actually, we're fixing fence here. And that, to me, is a tremendous story, because what the message that people that did not know what was really happening, they were getting a daily deluge that you were destroying property, that you had taken all of these artifacts and completely destroyed all of these old Native American facts and artifacts. And for those of us that actually knew what was going on, we knew that you were improving Malheur National Wildlife Refuge by the way, the day I was there, it was renamed Harding County Resource Center. But that to me was the epitome of what was going on. The story that most people were getting and what was really happening at the occupation of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge to benefit the Hammond family. Ammon Bundy, my guest. We are going to take a break on this Red Shirt Friday celebrating freedom, and particularly those individuals who have stood up for our country. When we come back, we're going to talk about what did Ammon learn while he was at Malheur about the Hammond family, Dwight and Stephen Hammond. More Rural Route after this. Once again, reminding you that the No Fans Left League is not going to make an impact on the chicken farmers. So what we do is double, maybe triple our chicken wing consumption in the month of January. When you do, post a picture, hashtag it, post it on social media, that is, and hashtag it. Chicken Wings Bowl. Hashtag Chicken Wings Bowl. Welcome back to Rural Route. I'm Trent Loos, Ammon Bundy, my guest, and we are talking about the last 2 years of his life, his family's life, Jeanette Finicum and her entire family's life. I feel so very fortunate to have been in Burns, Oregon on that first week of the occupation, because there is no way I could convey the message as I do. Simply the first night when I was the moderator for a town hall meeting, and we had 150 major media folks present. And Ammon, you probably don't know this story, but you were not at this meeting. I'm emceeing the meeting. We have 400 people present. 250 of them are local individuals from Harney County who are concerned about what the federal government's doing to Burns, not what the Bundys are doing at Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And the next morning, I start reading all of the media accounts of the meeting last night in Burns, Oregon, and every single one of them said, the community of Burns had a meeting last night. They just want the Bundys to go home. I'm like, I was the moderator for this meeting. This is not what I heard everybody say. And that to me was a perfect example of the selective portrayal of truth that the U.S. media, and I suppose the global media, but we can speak about the U.S. media, constantly tells what the government line is or what they want you to believe rather than the truth. How do you view the media today prior than what you did prior to 2 years ago this month?
Well, we saw that same thing happen at the Bundy Ranch in 2014. And so I was aware of it. I've experienced it many, many times now, even experiencing it right now. However, I will say this. The mainstream media gets what they deserve. And people are no longer, or at least they have tools to get the truth. And so if the mainstream media wants to continue to lose its ratings, continue to, diminish its audience, then just continue to cast these lies about what really is going on. And it is unbelievable what they do. And I don't think there's anything more that would lose the confidence of a listener than to know and find out that what was reported to them was inaccurate or actually intentionally given with an agenda.
Let's be very clear. You went to Malheur National Wildlife Refuge for one reason, to bring awareness to the injustice that had been brought down on the Hammond family. Is that true?
That is absolutely true.
Did you learn anything while you were there that furthered that concern?
Absolutely. We learned many things while we were there. We learned a lot of things before we got there, and which, made us feel that we were justified in furthering it. And I want people to understand that when we found out a lot of these injustices that were happening, this was before we went into the refuge, we reached out and did everything that we could to get the local representatives, the state representatives, to look at the evidence that we were going to present to them to prove and show that the federal government was, abusing this family and that there was serious misconduct. And the local representatives, the sheriff, the state representatives, governor, they just ignored us, completely ignored us. And we had hundreds, I I would say there's tens of thousands of signatures and on our redress of grievance and so forth. So we went in there as a protest and to bring awareness to the Hammonds. But we also knew that when we got in there that we would have access to all their records, we would have access to other things, and we took advantage of that. And we found a tremendous amount of just appalling misconduct, a pattern of it towards the Hammonds. And in fact, there was a chain of emails around the refuge employees and around the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that were kind of involved when the Hammonds were resentenced. They were cheering and saying, great, and they were, I can't remember the exact words because it's been some time, and but they were, excited and cheering and sending these emails of congratulations around to each other after the Hammonds were resentenced for the second time to go to prison for 5 years. And that's the type of stuff that we found. We also found records that showed that the refuge there, the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, was and probably still is selling the mineral rights out from underneath the private property owners of Harding County, and they had hired a large firm to handle these transactions. And we saw maps, colored maps, different satellite surveys of the different minerals and so forth, and they were actually in the process of actually selling these mineral rights out from underneath the private property owners. And the private property owners probably don't even know it. Mm-hmm. And they probably won't know it for many, many, many years until they come to extract that. And then the private property owner tries to stop them, and they are not able to because of the illegal transactions that unlawfully were taking place. So
to your point, the very first week after Dave Duquette and myself left you and Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, we went back to Burns and we sat at the kitchen table with Susie Hammonds for quite some time. And there was beginning to surface some information about uranium and uranium rights that had been sold to the Russians. And I said, Susie, there's a bunch of information that has surfaced through the internet about Russia actually acquiring uranium, and there's uranium deposits under Hammond's ranch. And she said, I don't know. I don't think there's anything about that. Well, 2 years later, I'm more than just a little bit convinced that this is all part of the Uranium One scenario. And here, individuals that own that property had no idea that all of this was happening in and around them. How can that be kept secret for so long? And how can the United States government sell minerals to a foreign country without the general public knowing it, in particular the people who own the surface rights?
I mean, I can go into a lot of detail, which we don't have time to today. But there has been a scam by the U.S. government for 60 plus years, 60, 70 years, in this idea of what they call split estate. Maybe even 70 years. This split estate thing where somehow a private property owner doesn't own the mineral rights. And now I know that there's been a tremendous amount of transaction that's gone on that under this split estate thing, and it's a real mess. But so let's just kind of set that aside and separate it from it. It comes back to what the federal government has authority to do and what they don't have authority to do. They do not have authority to own the minerals in the West or the East or anything anywhere. They do not have a right to own it. They have not been authorized constitutionally to own those mineral rights. And yet they're actually claiming 72% of the mineral rights in the Western states. And it's to the point where in Las Vegas, and this was a couple of years ago, they were actually fining people. It might still be going on. I just don't know. They're actually fining people for digging swimming pools in their backyard, because the Bureau of Land Management was claiming any of the soil that was 2 or 3 feet underneath the surface. And so when they were removing that soil and taking it wherever they were taking it, the BLM got in there and started fining them for that. That's the extent that we're at right now.
How many people relate to what you just said? You have to have had trouble. Oh, I can't let you answer that question. I look at my clock. Ammon Bundy, my guest. We will pick it up from right there. And I just will close with this one little sentiment. And Ammon, you need to meet a he's 17 now, year old young man from Oklahoma named Weston Jones. Since the Bundy Ranch scenario at Bunkerville and Malheur, he has taken it upon himself to hand a pocket constitution to every person he meets. I sent him another box of 200 the other day. He's walking around Washington, D.C., and he doesn't just hand it to them. He says, you need to read this. And it's unbelievable. He cannot believe how many people he hands a constitution that say, you know, I've never actually read it. We'll take a break with somebody who has read the Constitution. Ammon Bundy, my guest. More Rural Route after this. I want to take this opportunity to remind you about simply feeding sows with the use of a computer and an electronic sow feeding system. We choose to use the MPS Agri system based out of the UK. Get more information about the model we have called the Chieftain. There's an outdoor model as well. Ours is in a hoop barn. More details can be found online, www.mpsagri.co.uk. Welcome back to Rural Route. I'm Trent Loos alongside Ammon Bundy joining us. I just can't tell you how happy I am that I have the ability to make a phone call to him today. Let's talk more about the Hammonds, because there's so much misinformation about the fire itself, which ultimately led to them being convicted as domestic terrorists, because the handbook of the BLM and the U.S. Forest Service says that permittees cannot be held accountable for fire, because fire is a management tool on the range. There's a fire. Hammonds call, get permission to start a backfire, ultimately burn 137 acres, which is the reason that they sat at Terminal Island today. How much did you acquire any information about that particular fire in itself? Is there anything that we need to know about that?
Yes. So while we were at the refuge, we had a tremendous amount of other ranchers, community members coming to us, and at first they were literally just kind of sneaking in, trying to, and what I mean by that, so they could talk to us about some of the abuse that has been going on. And they were afraid at first, but they felt like, I guess, they trusted us and wanted us to know and understand some of their experiences. Well, one individual sent his, and I'm not going to get into names because this is still very applicable to the Hammonds, and I believe it'll be one of the reasons why they hopefully can get home sooner than the ending of their sentence. So anyway, he asked us to come to his house, and we did, and we recorded him telling us a story about how Frank Papagni, who is the assistant U.S. attorney who prosecuted the Hammonds, so he's the U.S. prosecutor, interviewed him about the fire in 2006 that was started by lightning, and then the Hammonds lit a backfire to protect their property, which is a very common thing in firefighting. And he said that, in fact, the lightning did not start the fire around the Hammonds' home ranch, that it was the BLM, because he saw them, and one other individual saw them drip torching around their property. And he told the prosecutor this, Frank Papagni, and then that was the last he ever heard of him. He was never called in as a witness into their trial. He was never asked for an affidavit, nothing. He never heard heard from them ever again. And so I did a little digging and contacted Susie, and we ended up contacting her attorney. And as far as her attorney knew, he was never given that information. And so to me, it's very impactful. One is it shows that the BLM are being vindictive in starting that fire and basically forcing the Hammonds to protect their property with a backfire. And then they were prosecuted for that. And part of that was one of the fires that they prosecuted for. And then two is Frank Papagni, the U.S. Attorney's Assistant U.S. Attorney for Oregon District, withheld exculpatory evidence. And if the jury would have had that evidence, I'm sure the outcome of the trial would have been much different.
Well, I don't know that we want to go into how well the Hammonds were represented, because I just cannot believe what negligence has been put forth from a legal representation. But you have to wonder, after what you've learned and been a part of in the past year with the trial in Las Vegas, Ammon, this must happen every day somewhere in what we call the judicial system.
Yeah, this is how they win. They throw you into jail, keep you away from your families. They don't feed you. They don't let you go outside. They keep you locked in a box until you're about ready to, just give up on everything. And then they lie about you to the court. They withhold the evidence from you, and you don't even have the ability to defend yourself. And then in the end, they say that you had your fair day of court in the courtroom. And that's what they kept saying about the Hammonds. What is Ammon Bundy, making such a big deal? The Hammonds had their fair day of trial, and it's just an absolute, just a gross, misrepresentation of justice. And these people do it every day, and they think it's okay, and they're destroying the liberties of the people.
With what you know right now, what do you see as the near future for the Hammond case?
Well, I plan on, doing everything I can to bring this stuff to the forefront with the actual facts and evidence of it. And I hope that someone in the judicial system somewhere will take a serious look at it and overturn what's been done and send the Hammonds home. If not, or maybe at the same time, the states and the counties need to be saying we're not okay with this and uniting, and if they won't, then the people need to do it again. I mean, we have no choice if the federal government is going to turn their sights on the American people and their rights and their property. And the states are not going to defend us because of federal funding and memorandums of understanding from the federal government. And the counties are not going to defend us for the same reason, or the local municipalities. Then the people have no choice but to defend themselves. Mm-hmm. And, the Hammonds, this cannot be okay. I said it, I feel like I'm, just picking back up where I left off 2 years ago. But we cannot allow this to happen in this country. It just must not happen.
I said from day one, and Hank Vogler and I were talking about Dwight and Stephen Hammond 2 years before any of this came to pass, because Hank actually testified in the trial itself. So I was up to speed a long time before. And from day one, we said that the responsibility of the Harney County Sheriff is to protect his or her citizens. That is where the failure was from day one. And that is, if you correct me if I'm wrong, the first place you went to assure the sheriff that you need to be protecting the Hammonds when the federal government comes for them on January the 4th.
Yeah, I went first to the Hammonds, and I spent several days and hours with them. Once I got the story, and it was correct, and I was confident in it, I went directly to the sheriff. I mean, that is exactly what I did. And asked him to to protect and defend him. And all I was asking at that point, and all we really ever asked, was for them to say, hey, put a hold on this. Don't send them to prison, because there's a lot of questions here that need to be answered. And we asked them to put together either a grand jury or what we call an evidential hearing board, to basically to look at all the evidence, from a perspective of a local perspective, and determine whether the federal government and these agencies were abusing this family and the people of Harney County. And he would not do it. He would not do it. And then he got infiltrated. Next thing you know, he's completely lost of his county to the FBI and who knows whatever else. And, there's a tremendous amount of stuff that happened.
Yeah, including 4 days after the infamous January 26th drive and fellow patriot Lavoy Finicum is murdered, Sheriff Dave Ward is on videotape dancing at a law enforcement party. That he showed his hand to me and the world right there.
Yeah, what a disappointment. That's all I can say. And he knows it. He was an individual that wasn't properly educated, but yet had a spark of patriotism, and then turned completely away from it. And I could just imagine where he's at now. But I know that he is not for the people. I mean, he did not stand for the people. And more is just going to keep coming out. And, and he is on a losing side. I know he thought he chose the winning side. And it looked like for a long time, while we were in prison, incarcerated and all that he was on the winning side. But I can promise you that he is not. Because what is being done to families and the people of this nation is despicable, and it will not last.
One thing in this last 2 minutes of this segment, Ammon, that I want to get to is you said that you went to the Hammonds first. Did Dwight or Stephen or Susie or anybody named Hammond call you and ask you to come and help? Secondly, did they encourage you or ask you to occupy Malheur National Wildlife Refuge?
On both questions.
I think it's important that people know that, because we have too much internet folklore out there that tries to make it believe that they somehow instigated this. As I know it, it came to you in a dream that you need to go there and be of assistance.
Yeah, that's pretty close. I had a very real spiritual experience, if you will, that directed me to go to the Hammond. I tried to actually deny that experience. I was further warned that it was my responsibility to do so. And so I acted on it, and I did the best I could to follow those impressions. And it was to bring attention to these things. And we're starting to now see some of those benefits. And I know my dad and we and many others had similar experiences at the ranch, in the Bundy Ranch in 2014. And I know that God cares about our freedom and our liberty, and that this country still needs to be an ensign to the nations of how to live free and how to be free and how to prosper and enjoy and raise families and be righteous. I know that. And if we do not live up to that those things will be taken away from us, just as they have in many incidents of great nations in the past.
Roll Route, Red Shirt Friday, Ammon Bundy, my guest. We've got one more segment. We'll come back right after this. There are many opportunities when you market cattle the superior way, but the one thing that always is the same is the system is built upon your relationship with a rep, whether you are a buyer or a seller, quite frankly. And I understand that there are 9,000 individuals that have bought in cattle and continually buying cattle from Superior. What a marketing opportunity that you have, and there are 17 different niche markets that you can be a part of, adding value to beef and capturing that value. That's what it's all about. Find your rep, Get more information about marketing your cattle on the country page by going to www.superiorlivestock.com. Welcome back to Rural Routes. I'm Trent Loos. We are already into the final segment. Ammon Bundy, my guest. I certainly appreciate you taking the time. I can't imagine you, it really shows the core of Ammon Bundy. You're released this week, and you take not only an hour with me, who knows how many people away from your family after you've not been with them for 2 years, to talk about what it takes to expose the truth about why Hammonds are unjustly in prison. It's a true testament to what your core makeup is, Ammon Bundy. I say thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
When I left, when we left Malheur that day, I told David, I said, Dave, he's letting anybody and everybody come in there. He doesn't have a handle on who's with him and who's against him. And now looking back, we now know at Malheur itself, you were outnumbered quite significantly by the FBI informants and FBI agents. Did you know that was happening as it did, or how do you sort all of that out? What's your thought process at that time? Because I think it's significant in what we're talking about here in terms of how we've had families that have been entrapped, and we've got a gentleman that comes in to teach you guys marksmanship, and he turns out that he's an FBI agent. How do you sort that all out in the heat of the moment?
Well, it was, there was hundreds of people, well over 1,000 people that come visited the refuge. And we know for certain that there was, I think, about a dozen informants that came in that were exposed during the trial. And yes, one of them came in and kind of embedded in there and then began to instigate different trainings, to the people, and then we found out that, he was an FBI agent. So, along with several others, they were trying to lead the people into acting, either violent or looking militarized, so that, they can spin this narrative of how dangerous we are, and then they could, again, justify coming in and using force. And taking lives. I mean, it's really deplorable. But on the same hand, wise or not, I have always lived and tried to live under the pretense that the sunlight is the best disinfectant. And so if someone wants to come in and be an informant, or if they want to eavesdrop on my phone calls, or if they want to see what I'm doing, well, great. I have nothing to hide. I'm trying to do the best I can to do the right things. Those around me, I believe, are trying to do the best they can to do the right things. And so, great. If you want to join us, if you want to drop on us, go ahead and do that. Now, we do have to be wise that we do not let them steer us in the direction that would be that would cause harm to anybody, because that's what their motives are, and that's what they were doing. But we should be wise in that anyway. I mean, there's always going to be somebody out there that's maliciously going to try to steer us in the wrong direction, or whatever that may be, and we need to be wise of that. And so, anyway, I don't know if that really answered your question, but that's kind of how we took it, or at least that's how I took it, and many others took it. And actually, to come full circle, when I was exposed in front of the jury in the trial in Oregon, the jury just was so turned off by the FBI and their actions. Mm-hmm. And so they dug a pit for us to fall in, and then they fell in it themselves.
I think that's a great analogy, and I knew what your answer was before I asked it, because Shauna Cox has been on this program twice in the last 60 days, and she has repeated. Ammon always said sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I think we should all live with that motto every single day.
Yeah, it's a safe one. It's the honest one. I mean, that's certainly what our government should be living by, but it appears that it's not the fact.
Yeah. That, too, was predicted by our forefathers, by the way, as you well know. I want to maybe spend some more time on transparency with what happened to Hammond's, but also, before we run out of time, and just so you know, we've got about 6 minutes left, we celebrate this week charges being dismissed against you, Ryan, your father, Ryan Payne. Let's remember that there are currently 4 Bunkerville Bundy Ranch defendants still incarcerated, still with possible charges in a trial against them, 2 of which are your brothers. What do we need people to know about that?
Well, I need to clear the record because it seems like it is incorrect out there. There is 4 remaining friends. I don't want to call them defendants because they're my brothers and friends that are waiting trial and scheduled for trial on February 26th, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
However, those 4 are not incarcerated. They were released on pre-trial release about a couple weeks ago, and so they are out. However, they are still facing these charges with 100 years minimum sentencing on them, or I think it's down to like 68 years minimum sentencing on them, or something to that effect. Now, people may not understand that they broke us up into 3 different trials, and the first trial, or the first group, 3 different groups to be tried. The first group went to trial, and 2 of them were convicted, and the other 4, there was a hung jury. Then they went to another trial, and it was a hung jury, and then they ended up, some of them were acquitted, and others ended up going home, and there was some other things that went on. But those 2 that were convicted, the only reason they were convicted is because the government withheld the evidence, and we uncovered that in our trial. So 3 trials later. So we have those men that have been convicted, and one of them's been sentenced and serving time right now because the government has withheld evidence such as snipers surrounding the Bundy home. They wouldn't let them talk about that. They said that we made that up, and now it's clearly, there's just beyond a large amount of evidence that there was snipers around the Bundy home, and both FBI and BLM. So I kind of went on a little bit, but I wanted to clarify that.
Right. I, in fact, heard myself say incarcerated. I knew they weren't, but I thought that it was a good way for you to get the facts out there and make sure people don't forget about that. And all of those that pled to some degree of guilt before all charges have been dropped, in both trials, actually.
Yeah, it's really, the interesting thing is those that were convicted, the 2 that were convicted, because they didn't have, access to the evidence, they wouldn't let them bring it in front of the jury. Those will be overturned because, we know now that the prosecutors lied and withheld a tremendous amount of evidence from them. But those that plea, because it's extremely difficult to be in jail, and they just are looking for relief, looking for, some type of hope and future, they actually make a deal with the government and a plea deal, knowing that what they're saying is not accurate, but it's become kind of the process. It's more difficult for them. Like, there's not a mechanism that's really there for them to use, even though they were innocent men. And it reminds me of an Ayn Rand quote in Atlas Shrugged that says, an innocent man is not guilty until he's made guilt that is not his own.
Yeah. Talk about a person who had some insight into the future of our country. Wow.
Yeah. She's tremendous. That's quite a book to read, but she understood. She went through 2 revolutions, saw 3 different types of government before she escaped to the United States. And, understood and was able to, she had a gift to articulate those things, and certainly applicable to what's happening nowadays. And anyway, I feel tremendously obligated to bring attention to the Hammonds, bring attention to my brothers and friends that are still facing, these false charges, and bring attention to those that were convicted because the government withheld evidence in their trial, and bring attention to those who, out of whatever reason, was just too difficult to continue to stand and that admitted guilt that was not their own, because all of these men did the right thing, stood for the right reasons, and they should be honored. And they came and stood and defended a ranching family that's been in that area ranching for 140 years, and I'm grateful for them.
Ammon, we're in the final minute. There's a lot of ways we could close this, but I choose to talk about one cowboy that obviously left us in an unjust way on January the 26th. But as I told Jeanette the other day, I'm not sure, maybe God just needed an extra hand in making sure transparency and sunlight was disinfecting all of the problems that we had. And we all say thank you to the Finicum family and what Lavoy Finicum stood for every day of his life.
Yes. I still find it very difficult to talk about Lavoy. But he was a man of honor, and he was a man that understood far beyond what even I understand. And they killed him for it. And but I know that he's doing a tremendous amount of good on the other side. I know that his voice is crying from the dust to bring justice to these things. And if we can only see what he truly has done and what he truly is doing, I think we'd be just in awe. And my hat goes off to